the things you do. So, if you were having a party and you could only invite one person, who would you invite? Georgia would invite Abigail. That's nice. Oh. What about if you had a party and you could invite 5 people? Who would you invite? Have a think. What about if you could invite 50 people? Is that harder or easier? Abby and Biko are getting married, and how has that been, getting the wedding list, the invitations together? The more you invite, the harder you know when to stop. Just gets bigger and bigger. Well, the host in this story is throwing a party, an amazing banquet, and he has quite an extensive guest list, but it is a list. It says they are those who are invited. It's not an open, free-for-all party. There are invited guests. The context of this story, if you read a little further on in Luke 14, is that Jesus has been invited to the leader of the Pharisees' house for a Sabbath dinner. And other religious leaders are there. It says some lawyers are there. There'll be religious lawyers. So Jesus is sitting eating with the kind of Jewish great and the good. And Jesus tells this story, this parable. And there's a host, somebody, the person throwing the party, the banquet. There's the servant. There are the invited, and there are the others. Now, we can see, perhaps, that the host, the person throwing the party, as God. And we know, and the people who were listening to Jesus and this story would know, that God had made a covenant with the Jewish people, that they are the invited ones. We read in the New Testament, it says, I will be your God, and you will be my people. They are the invited ones, God's chosen people, invited to his glorious banquet. Hence the quote slightly earlier than we didn't read that Jesus, did we read it? I can't remember. Jesus said this story in response to that said, blessed are those. Somebody responded, blessed is anyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. You see, they assume it's them that are going to be eating the bread, eating the food, going to the banquet in the future kingdom that is coming. They assume it's them. There's an expectation. They are the invited, the chosen ones. But as usual with Jesus' parables, Jesus' story, there's a bit of a sting in the tale. The servant goes out to tell the people, and the words say, go tell them that the party is ready now. It's ready now. The kingdom has come. Everything's ready. Come on, come and join the party. And what happens? They all make excuses. It says they all alike make excuses. And each one of them was quite polite. If you remember, as we read it together, it said, please excuse me. They are polite excuses, but they all reject the generous offer of the host. The first one, if you remember, was about some land. Yeah? I've purchased some land. It's about possessions, thank you. The excuses. I've purchased some land. The second was about work. I've just purchased 10 oxen, got to go and try them out. The third excuse was about relationships. I've got married. Can't come, got married. Now, if these were really good Jewish scholars, and we assume they were really good Jewish scholars, then they'd probably recognize that these are reasons, not excuses. These all relate to a little bit in Deuteronomy. So this is the geeky theology bit for those of you who are interested in things like that. These are the 3 reasons why somebody could legitimately not answer a call to a holy war. These, in Deuteronomic law, these are legitimate and valid reasons for not answering a call. You see, all excuses are legitimate and valid to those that are making them. They think that they'll appear acceptable to the host. But in this parable, Jesus does not legitimize these reasons for not answering the call to the kingdom, the call to the feast of heaven. They are not acceptable to the host. In fact, the host's reaction is pretty extreme. He fills his banquet from those from the town that probably represents the Jewish community that are seen as outsiders. We've talked quite a lot the last few weeks about tax collectors, people of the Jewish community but are still seen as outsiders, and those from the country lanes, possibly meaning the Gentiles, those outside of the Jewish community, outside of being God's chosen people. The banquet is filled with people that the people who are listening to the story would never think would be invited. They're the ones that are out, not the ones that are in. This is a lovely picture, by the way, of a sort of a 20th century artist called Eugene Burnand, and he was an artist. Go and look him up. He was an artist who painted a lot of the parables. The most famous one, it's become more famous recently, as well as a story. He paints Peter and John rushing to the tomb at the resurrection. You might recognize that if you see it. But a beautiful picture, a man of deep faith who painted the parables. Sorry, just an aside. You see, with these people that were invited, there was an assumption that the reasons, possessions, works, and relationship would be okay. They were legitimate excuses, legitimate reasons. And there was a presumption on relationship. There was an assumption that God would excuse their excuses. And there was a presumption on past relationship. But maybe this relationship demanded more of them than they realized. So what about us? I think a lot of the time we read this parable and we think it's a call for us to invite the lost and the least, like the host is doing. And that's fine. That's okay to do that. And we should, like Jesus, invite those in, invite anyone in to join us at the party. But actually, it's a salutary tale. Jesus is eating with those who think they're in, but they don't really recognize the urgency of the relationship that's in front of them. And these are timeless excuses, aren't they? Possessions, work, and relationships. They take away the urgency of the relationship with Jesus that's in front of us. And we've made them kind of conventional expectations of the norm. It's okay for us to be taken up with possessions and work and relationships. They're the things that we make okay, then we don't have to do X, Y, and Z. They're the things that we use to explain the way we do our lives. We're too busy doing X to maybe come to church this week, or to maybe do that Bible study, or maybe just to spend some time praying with Jesus. I'm too caught up in my work to meet up with that friend who might need a conversation. And so we don't, because we have an excuse that we've legitimized because of societal norms. This is not a guilt trip. I don't want us to sit here feeling too guilty, but it's good for us to reflect on priorities. I think the important thing to reflect on, particularly for those of us who've been followers of Jesus for a long time, is that we can become like these Pharisees, the people who take the invitation for granted. assume that God will excuse our excuses, and presume on the relationship and not see the urgency or expectation of the host. You know, we can feel pretty rubbish if we invite someone and they make an excuse and they don't come. That'd feel pretty rubbish. Maybe the friendship doesn't mean as much to them as it does to us. Maybe the meal that you've made isn't quite as inviting to them as it looks to you who made it. Imagine how God feels if we treat his banquet like that. That we presume on the relationship, that he'll still be sitting at the table if we get up and leave for a bit. That we might brush aside the invitation in favor of our own interests and pursuits. And the thing is, if we do that, we miss out on the endless joy of being in his presence forever. So, just in summary and to finish, those of us who know we've been invited, are you showing up? Are you showing up in a way that honors the host? Are you still sitting at the table? Do you desire to be at the party because it's full of good things? And I think sometimes we forget that. It's full of good things. Don't forget it. It's going to be a great party. And maybe there's some of you who feel like you're not yet invited. Maybe this party isn't for you. Then I want to say to you today, it is. Jesus is saying, you are invited. You are invited. The table is ready. The question is, are you coming? Great. You're coming. The table is ready. Let's have that last slide. The table is ready. The banquet is ready. Are you coming?